I'm gonna build a sweet little ITX computer today. Oh hey, how you doing? TechDweeb here. Thanks for joining me. Yeah, I'm gonna build a computer. Why, you ask? Well, that's kinda nosy. Maybe it's none of your business. You ever think of that? You did? Okay. Well, I like to build computers, that's why. Building computers is fun. It's what I do for fun. One of the things I do for fun. What do you do for fun? Let me know in the comments below. If it's watching dweebs build computers, then yeah, I guess you're gonna like this video, because that's what we're doing today. The real reason I'm building this today is I have a bunch of spare parts that, you know, they're just sitting around, so I figured why don't I just build a PC, and building PCs is sometimes a better way to use up your spare parts, not only because you get the fun of building a PC, you can actually usually get more money for the parts if you sell it as a complete computer rather than selling the parts individually, because people are more likely to pay top dollar for a really nice gaming PC that's all built and ready to go, rather than just selling a bunch of parts to tech junkies who are looking for deals. And another reason I wanted to do this build was because of this case here. I've had my eye on this case for a while. It's a really nice looking case, and I think it's going to be an interesting one to build in. And I guess making this video is just an excuse to build in this case. And I just love making small ITX PCs. That's another reason. I guess I have lots of reasons for building this computer today. Now that I think about it. So this is the Phanteks Eclipse P200A ITX case. It's supposed to be a high airflow, ultra fine mesh design, so I'm expecting some decent thermals. One of the things that interests me is that this case uses a full-size ATX power supply, which is nice because those little small form factor SFX power supplies can be really pricey. I have a few parts that I've never used before, and this should be a fun build. So, without further delay, let's dive in and build a PC. Whee! For the motherboard and processor, well, this is the old motherboard and processor from my living room PC that I have connected to my TV. I upgraded that one to a 12th generation i5-12400F in a new ITX B660 motherboard, and this is what I have left over. I'm gonna link that video in the description below. This is the ASUS ROG H470i motherboard. It's a good motherboard. It's a good brand. The ASUS ROG series is really nice quality. Always nice to build on. For the processor, we're going with the i5-10400F. Like I said, these were leftover parts from another PC, but I would have no problem buying these parts new for a build if the price was right. The 10400F is still a great gaming processor, and you can usually find them at a pretty good discount now that they're a few years old. Here's our RAM. This is a XPG Spectrix DDR4 kit, rated for up to 3200 MHz. I bought it because it was cheap, and it looked pretty good too, with those RGB heatsinks. The main problem that we'll have with this setup, specifically our H470i motherboard, is that it won't allow our RAM to run at its full speed of 3200 MHz. You know, the H470i chipset that doesn't allow RAM overclocking. It's not the end of the world, but that's a sacrifice you make when going with a budget series of motherboards. We'll see how much of an issue running the RAM at the default clock speed for the 10400F of 2666 MHz will make. I'll tell you right now, it's not going to be much of a big deal. I had this motherboard and processor in my living room PC before, and it never caused an issue for me. For the SSD, I'm reusing an older Intel NVMe SSD. Nothing too fancy here. Gen 3 PCIe, 1TB. This motherboard has a nice feature. It has a heat spreader for the M.2 slot here, which is nice because this SSD doesn't have a built-in heatsink, and it tucks it away nicely under this cool shroud, which is a bonus when your SSD is an ugly green OEM-looking PCB. Since we're using an AIO liquid CPU cooler, we need to install the CPU block first. This is the Deepcool Gammix L120V2. It's just a simple 120mm all-in-one liquid cooler without a CPU block and a radiator and some nice RGB goodness. I bought this as an open box item from Amazon, so it didn't come with a box, I guess. You know me, always on the lookout for those deals. And I actually lost some footage here where I show mounting the LGA 1200 bracket and mounting screws and stuff and putting a thermal paste on the CPU and then putting the CPU block on. I'm sorry about that. Just use your imagination and picture me doing that stuff. You're not missing much. Once the CPU block was installed, it's just a matter of tightening it down and then plugging in that sweet, sweet RGB goodness. And there we go. That's our motherboard, CPU, SSD, RAM. It's all set up and ready to rock. So let's move on to the case. Let's pull it apart and see what we're dealing with. There's some nice cable management features, as you can see. All the cables are pre-routed, so that's a nice help. It comes with 2 ARGB fans on the front, so we'll just leave those as they are. Like I said, we get that full-sized ATX power supply support, so I'm going to install that now, because why not? This is an AZZA PSU. 750 watts, 80 plus broads. I've never used this brand of power supply before. We'll see how this goes. It's not modular, just to save some money. Looks like there's lots of extra cables here, so hopefully that's not going to be too difficult to cable manage. Let's get this motherboard installed and in the case. Don't mind my massive dweeb biceps here. Motherboard in, and we'll just test to make sure that this AIO radiator will fit. Oh man, that's tight. Super tight. It's like right up against the CPU block. Hopefully that won't be a problem. It should be fine, I think. There we go, motherboard all screwed in. Let's do a quick preliminary look at this giant octopus tangle of cables we gotta deal with. Man, when you build with modular power supplies often, going back to non-modular just reminds you how annoying dealing with this stuff is. Okay, so we need our 24-pin motherboard power, our 8-pin CPU power, 8-pin PCIe power, SATA power for our secondary storage drive, and yeah, I think that's it, actually. We'll put everything through to the back, and hopefully this case is easy to cable manage, because if not, then it's going to be a struggle, because there's not a lot of extra room back here. Okay, so there's our motherboard power and CPU power. That's not too annoying to deal with. And while we're back here, let's plug in the RGB connector for the front fans. Luckily, this motherboard has both types of RGB connection, the 4-pin 12-volt RGB header and the 3-pin 5-volt ARGB header, and that covers both our CPU cooler and the case fans. That's convenient. It's almost like I planned this. Oh, and we also have to do our HD audio for the front audio jack, and the front power button connection, and the front USB 3.0 connection. Alrighty, time to put in our storage drive. This case doesn't have a full-size 3.5-inch hard drive support, which is kind of weird because it's kind of a bigger ITX case. I feel like they could have squeezed in a slot for a full-size drive, but yeah, whatever. So I had to use one of these 2.5-inch laptop drives. This is just a 1 terabyte drive I had lying around from an old laptop I tore down. That'll do just fine as a game storage drive, especially since we already have 1 terabyte as our system drive. 2 terabyte total, and that's plenty for a budget gaming build like this. The hard drive mounts to this support tray along the backside of the motherboard. Oh, speaking of which, it's nice that we're able to access the backside of the motherboard here. For example, if you ever needed to do maintenance or change out that AIO, nice to be able to access everything without taking the whole PC apart. And on to cable management. You know, going into this task, I wasn't looking forward to it, but this case is actually amazing for cable management. There are these channels along the chassis where the cables naturally route, and there are these little metal brackets that hold them all in place. I was able to snug up and secure all these cables without using a single zip tie. You just shove them down into the channel and lock them down with the little clasps. And there's a big empty space at the top that can house any extra cables from the power supply, which I did have, obviously. And there are some Omni-tape cable ties that hold them all in place, built right into the case. This took a surprisingly little amount of time, and in the end it was neat and tidy, and the back cover fit on and everything. Yeah, good job, Phanteks Eclipse P200A. You've impressed me several times so far. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Maybe. I don't know. I love this part, putting in the GPU. It's always the last thing I do. It's a little reward for getting through the build. This is the ASUS Dual GeForce RTX 3060. This model of the card comes overclocked from the factory. It has 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 VRAM, 192-bit memory bus, 3,584 shaders, 28 RT cores for all that ray tracing you want to do, and 112 tensor cores for that sweet DLSS. And it's a nice looking version of the card too. I bought it because it was cheap, but it doesn't feel cheap at all. It has a nice metal backplate and some subtle lighting along the side. It's not tacky or gaudy the way that some of the cheap GPUs look. I like it. Alright, that's it. We're freaking done. The build at least. Time to press the power button and see what happens. Hey, all the lights came on. That's a nice sign. Are we gonna post? Come on, baby. Alright, we got a post. That's what I'm talking about. Let's get into the BIOS and see what we're dealing with. So there's our RAM. We can enable XMP in the BIOS, but it won't actually work since this is an H series board and it doesn't allow for RAM overclocking. I don't understand why they even put that in on H series chipsets. The RAM here will end up running at 2666, which is the max RAM speed supported by default by our 10400F processor. Another thing I like to do right off the start is choose a fan profile. I usually go with the quiet profile by default and then up it if the thermals end up being an issue. And here's our storage too. Nice. We did it, guys.
Yay!
Now we just gotta boot to Windows. Oh, I forgot to mention that I already had Windows installed on that SSD. So yeah, let's get it booted up and make sure everything works okay. Alrighty, Windows is good to go apparently. Now is where you can watch me open up Task Manager and point at the screen even though you can't see anything on the video. I was trying to show you that our CPU is running fine, 6 cores, 12 threads, and our memory is running at 2666 MHz like I predicted, and our RTX 3060 grabbed the NVIDIA drivers that were already installed on the system and it's working just fine. This here is my external games drive. I keep a bunch of Steam games on here, updated and ready to play so that I don't have to copy everything over to a new PC. I can just set this up as a library on Steam and play them right off the external drive. It makes testing games on computers so quick and easy like this. Oh, actually, before we get into the games, let's set our RGB. This is an ASUS board, so we can use the Armory Crate application and pick our RGB profiles. I really like ASUS's RGB software personally. You know, it's got lots of options, all the options that I like to have. It's got a bit of an overhead, lots of people hate it, but you know, I think it's pretty good. I like this pink and peach fading effect. It calms me. Alright guys, I think we're ready, don't you? Should we do a peel? Yeah, let's do a peel. Alright, here we go. Quick like a band-aid. That's my style. Alright, you've been patient. I suppose we should try out some games, huh? Well, the gaming experience is pretty great on a setup like this. You know, for 1080p or even 1440p, you'll have no problem running most games at high or ultra settings, even with ray tracing, especially because we can make use of DLSS to upscale our games to higher resolutions and give them a performance boost. I'm not going to do an extensive gaming test here, but here's a few examples of the performance. Let's start off with a little Shadow of the Tomb Raider, running at 1080p, ultra preset, with quality DLSS because why not? We're getting like 95 FPS. And you can even run this at 1440p or even 4K if you choose a lower preset and put it on balanced or performance DLSS. Let's turn on ray tracing and see how it does. At this camera angle here, we're getting 108 FPS without ray tracing, and then when we turn on ultra ray tracing, we go down to 72 FPS. But we're still over 60 FPS. Max settings, max ray tracing, that's pretty awesome. And Red Dead Redemption 2 at 1080p with a first favor quality preset, quality DLSS, and we got an average of 68 FPS by the end of my little test run. This is one of, if not the best looking games there is, in my opinion. And we're getting over 60 FPS on nearly max settings. And just like Tomb Raider, you'd have no problem running this at 4K with like performance DLSS as slightly lower settings. That's why I love these mid-range builds. They pack enough horsepower to push some high settings, but they stop short of being overpowered and they don't break the bank. And finally, of course, we have to test Cyberpunk 2077, don't we? 1080p, ultra preset with quality DLSS, and we got an average of 67 FPS. In Cyberpunk, that's some very solid performance considering how demanding this game is at ultra settings. This is with ray tracing turned off, obviously. The 3060 can do ray tracing, but you know, I personally don't think it's worth the performance hit you take. I made a whole video on that topic. There's a link to that below if you want to check it out. This game looks amazing with or without ray tracing when it's up to ultra settings. You're really not missing out on much if you just ignore ray tracing entirely. And again, the performance here feels like a high-end system, even though it's just sort of a mid-range system. Actually, with these components and the prices you get them at, it's almost on the budget end of the spectrum. You can get some frankly incredible gaming performance these days, considering how cheap the parts are getting now that the GPU scalping mining cataclysm has come to an end. This turned out really beautiful, in my opinion. I'm super happy with how this looks. I love ITX cases because they're small and efficient. They can be quite cramped in to work in sometimes, and this one wasn't. It has lots of features of a full-size case. It has support for a full ATX power supply. It has space to mount a 240mm AIO. It supports triple slot GPUs, which you rarely see in ITX cases. And it has some great cable management features. It's easy to build it. I had no problems making everything fit and routing the cables and stuff. Even with my non-modular power supply, it only took me like 5 minutes to tuck away all the cables and get it all neat and tidy. It comes with 2 RGB fans and a mesh panel on the front for some good airflow. Thermals were not an issue. Our RTX 3060 got up to like 77 degrees, which isn't uncommon. That's totally fine. And our max CPU temperature was only like 60 degrees. And I think that's just down to how open this case is with the vented front panel. And of course, it's beautiful. This case design lends itself to RGB focused builds. And when you can sync all the fans and the coolers and the RAM with some good RGB software, it all just comes together so nicely. So yeah, I'm super happy with this case. I highly recommend it. But what do you guys think of this build? Do you like this case or ITX cases in general? Thinking about picking one of these up? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And while you're down there, click the thumbs up button if you like the video, or the thumbs down button if you didn't like it. Subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. As always, I'm TechDweeb. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.